Hello, good evening. My name is Tambuatco and welcome to our program. This is called Talk to Harry. But it's not too much me you're going to be talking to, but through me with the number of guests we have in the studio. But before we start the show, I'd like to congratulate GNN on this new studio and our new location right here in the heart of the CBD, right here in Makati. Now, we're doing a lot of things in the studio. It's so much bigger, it's so much better. So congratulations to the management, the President, Philip Tien, the broadcast manager, Laurelyn Velarde. Okay, so on with the show. The topic tonight would be basically the APEC and the ASEAN. Hang on with a question mark. But before anything else, let me introduce our guest. So from my far right, we've got Gil Santos, who is with the Futuristic Center. He's president and is also a special lecturer for the Lyceum Philippines University. We also have June Salipsip, who is also with the Futuristic Center, and he's with the foundation of the AmCham, if I'm not mistaken. Right, June? And of course, you know very well Dr. John Teope, who's with us, who will co-host. So it's going to be four of us. In other words, sa Tagalog, ang tawag dito, parang karambola. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. And buti na lang, we finally got this show together.
Good to have you here.
Yeah, with all the movement. Okay, let's get the ball rolling. Let's go straight to the APEC, the way things are going. On the newspapers, the headlines are grabbing between Pacquiao and the APEC. I wonder what is more important. The fact that the fight which he won, his opponent says he should not have won. Well, and Obama on the other side saying, hey, I want to take over the world. Are you?
Well, it really depends on how you look at it, the perspective of the reader. See, if we're the jeepney drivers, of course, they're going to talk about Pacquiao. That's a given, you know. But if you're going to be on the side of the people who are thinking of what's going to happen to us in the light of what's going on in Honolulu, they're closing it right now.
Wait, hang on. Let me see. Do we have those people?
What do you mean, do you have those people?
I'm being sarcastic. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in Honolulu, where the APEC is closing today,
yes,
in fact, by now it's closed already, you know, they're issuing a statement. And the statement says Obama and the Americans want the free trade agreement. In short, an economic integration of the Asia-Pacific region. Because it represents something like 75% of the world's total population, and it controls more than 44% of the world's total commerce. You know, so that's a lot of money. It's a lot of consumer supply and the supply chain.
Talking on the broad scale, when we had the APEC here in Subic, it was a big brouhaha. Since its inception, the one thing they've been pushing for ever since was always free trade.
Yes.
Before we move further to exactly what this is doing, how has free trade helped us, or has it clobbered our economies?
Not much. It hasn't helped us much. In fact, the farmer.
It has not helped any, because we've been importing rice, we've been importing corn, we've been importing, 80% of our total dairy meat and dairy products are imported. So every time we import, we're just subsidizing the farmers of the other country we buy from. See, so that's what.
So the reason the APEC is there, and even the ASEAN that's about to be launched, is basically to get all these countries to be able to open up free trade. Is this what we're? This is what's happening?
This is what Obama and the U.S. wants.
Okay.
You know. Now, we must not also forget the fact that the U.S. is pushing this for their own industrialization, for the recovery. Yes, may agenda.
You know, Harry, when we speak of the free trade, the U.S. and the Philippines, and we mention about the Pacquiao-Marquez fight, as if you're now competing a Manny Pacquiao against Muhammad Ali. So, in terms of that point, what products can we trade to this international market? We're an agricultural country, we're not so industrial. So the free trade agreement would only benefit those countries who are really dominating in the industry. And that's why I would like to ask you both of you the questions that, will this APEC be beneficial to the economy? Anybody?
You want to go first, and then I'll support.
Okay. I think to a certain extent, I think we cut down our tariffs so quickly. I think other countries didn't do that. I think they were trying to watch out what others are doing, and then they keep cutting down lower.
Protectionism.
Yeah, protectionism. So they still protect. For example, I think the U.S. protects their agricultural industry.
They subsidize it.
Okay, they subsidize it. So the thing is, if we need to compete in this world, I think we need to think in terms of this free trade thing is going to, I think we cannot avoid it. This is a globalized world.
But in terms of this free trade agreement or in the free trade in the international markets, that only the oligarchs in the Philippines would only benefit. The small entrepreneurs, they could not compete in the international market.
Which is why we have this kind of phrase. Actually, our development is not growth.
Yeah.
Because precisely of that kind of relationship between the elite and the have-nots.
Yeah.
The access, what's the access of the small entrepreneur to capital? Almost none.
Yeah.
Almost none. But the access of the multi-billion industries is really there, you know, and it's real. They can do it.
So are you saying the APEC is not good, but it's inevitable, as June says,
yes.
because whether we like it or not, the globalization of the world has to come to terms with itself, a reality we all have to face.
That's true.
But when we have the competing economies working towards trade and opening the tariffs, wherein countries can no longer protect their own economies, ang mangyayari dyan, ang kulela at matatalo. Matatalo.
That's true.
But you will not really suffer if our national leadership can think ahead. And
Well, let's not ask them too much. Let's not go that far.
but it is necessary because they have to think in terms of time frames. Dapat yan merong hangganan eh. Sa ganitong panahon, ganitong taon, ganitong gagawin natin. Let's say we must, number one, we must realize that our biggest asset now is the expansion of our inland waters under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas. Can you imagine? Imagine how much fish we can sell as finished processed products, canned goods, you know, to India, to China, to the United States, and even Canada, because those people want cheaper and the sufficient amount of supply at any given time that they need it.
You know, Harry, in terms of looking at economic development and economic growth, the problem right now that we would have is that the economy is really being tightened or being squeezed by the Constitution. The 1987 Constitution only serves the oligarchs. And within that point is that monopoly do exist in our country. We have a monopoly in terms of electricity, we have a monopoly in terms of media, we have a monopoly in terms of all major industries. Now, who would compete with these oligarchs in this country? There would be a problem. So, if you would only open up to the economy to foreign investors, and some sort is that looking at the Constitution and amend the Constitution wherein open competition would be there, and as they look at it, more supply, what would happen? They would lower the cost.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And good for the consumer.
Yeah.
The other thing you haven't added yet is, I think, is the the factor of how you can bring down the energy cost and how you can avoid conflicts of interest, because our oligarchs have overlapping interests.
But how could we break the monopoly?
When the congressmen don't want to change it.
Yeah.
What happened to the APEC? I got lost.
Well,
Is that good for us with what's going on there? Before we,
you know, Harry, in the APEC, one of the lobby provisions of some of the countries in APEC is that we're asked to open the economy to foreign investment, but the Constitution is hindering us from these foreign investments. Remember, I'll give an example. There is a power corporation, there's Meralco. If there would be power corporations coming in from other countries, such as the European Power Corporation, American Power Corporation, there would be a choice. So, if you do not like the services of Meralco, you could go to another, and you could go to another. Now what? There's only Meralco that would give us the electricity, so they could demand the cost of Meralco. And look at what happened to the telecommunication industry. Then it was only PLDT. When Globe came, Smart came, and these players came, what happened to the cost of communication? It becomes cheaper. So what we need is competition in the industry. And one thing is that the APEC, the conference, there is that specific Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, is that for these countries to look at themselves, to be dependent on each other, and to have a good trade. But the problem is that other countries is opening up, and the Philippines is closing in.
no, because in a way, you're going to have these countries also looking for their own national interests. That's the thing that's permanent, you see. But what we really have to do is, for our leadership here, to think ahead and see how are we going to take care of ourselves. Number one, 2013, we will hit we will break the 100 million mark of our people.
You mentioned about the leadership. This leadership is being controlled by the oligarchs. If they would defy the oligarchs, they would not be leaders. They would not be elected.
Because our educated public have not yet surfaced. I know it's going to take a lot of time because this is evolutionary. You know, you do it otherwise. You do it by revolution. The cost of reconstruction is going to be much more. You know.
Well, with the APEC going where it's going, America just passed in its Congress just early this year a resolution opening trade on agriculture, for example. And they are asking now South Korea to join in, and the farmers are already basically beginning to revolt. Because should this happen, how can one country compete with another country when agriculture, for example, in America is subsidized? Well, they subsidize their own produce. Hindi pwede, hindi tugma yung labanan. Hindi, in other words, it's not an even fight, so to speak. So the larger countries will come in. Now, Obama is spreading his wings, but he has to. He has, using this, as you mentioned before we started the show, he's using this to be a base for his platform, assuming he can...
For re-election.
Yes, for re-election. Now, what politicians do that, even here, it's always in aid of re-election.
Yes.
Now, Obama, whether he's going to stay there or not, is going to be a $1 million question. But the same situation applies to China. It also applies to some other countries where leaderships are changing.
Except in America, you have that much freedom and the independence of the voter. You see, that's guaranteed by their own constitution. Now, in the case of Russia, which, by the way, is changing its leadership
also,
next year, you know, next year also, and China, which is changing leadership also next year, yes, these are entirely different because all those controlled economies are different when it comes to governance, and they don't play the same fair game that we have in mind. That's why I keep saying, and I'm going to ask June, because they have a group at their foundation which says these are the sunrise industries. These are the sunrise entrepreneurial opportunities for the Filipinos, and we must take care of this, don't you?
Yeah, I think, for example, when it comes to mining, I think the Philippines is very rich when it comes to
I agree with you there.
Natural resources. And we are not going to profit from it if we don't take it out. I think we are so always afraid of pollution or waste. But the thing is, I think all we need to do is really control that. I think we should be very strict when it comes to environmental control. But I think we should continue with the mining. But there are lots of demonstration of people.
But we are continuing with the mining. The implementation of the Mining Act is where it all goes wrong because local government mines. Let's not forget that. They're actually mining.
Yes.
It's the big mining industry, it's the big mining venture capital that we are lacking because we are holding them back.
Yeah, but that's what we need because I think...
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I totally agree
I think, for example, that's one of them. The other thing that we need to do, I think, is to have a manufacturing policy because with manufacturing, we would be able to have a multiplier effect. Because whenever you manufacture something, for example, if you're going to process food or even canned goods, you have to buy the label, the paper, you have to buy the tin, you've got all those things. So it creates a lot of other industries that will create jobs for people. So I think people in the Philippines would need to. We don't even have to think of supplying goods to other countries. I think by supplying 100 million people first, I think we would be able to provide enough jobs for people that we have in the Philippines.
You know, Harry, in the APEC conference, one of the agenda being discussed there is the concept of Agenda 21 in sustainable development. And you mentioned about mining. I would like to ask you is that if mining would be pushed through by the government, will there be such a thing as sustainable mining? Because usually environmentalists would look at it, mining is destroying the environment, and how could we sustain the environment through mining?
Yeah, but for example, you'll notice in Australia, I think they're very strong when it comes to mining, and I think they're supplying China and other countries when it comes to... So I think they have rules and regulations that really are very strict and protects the environment.
How about biodiversity?
Well, biodiversity, you can still do that, except the implementation of the rules and regulations must be to the letter. You see, there must be no leeway. There must be no human factor when it comes to implementation of the rules and regulations. They must be followed to the letter.
So tama yung ginagawa ng APEC, nagkikita-kita ang mga iba-ibang bayan at nagsama-sama, nagsasalo-salo para pag-usapan ko ng mga ekonomiya na pwedeng pasukan para sa lahat. Ang problema, the bully comes in.
Yan, tama.
Yes.
Doon tayo nagkakamali. Doon nagkakaipit-ipitan, di ba? The interest of one sometimes surpasses the interest of everybody as a whole.
The bully can succeed only if the other guy, if the weaker guy, allows him to be bullied. Because he's not thinking of what advantages he has. I look at it.
Where do we fall? We're the small one. We're the ones
the small ones fall from the weak.
The weak, yeah.
The weak. You don't have the strength. It's the old SWOT. The SWOT. The strength, the weakness, the opportunities, and the threats. Now, if there is a threat to you, there's an opportunity to do better. If there is a weakness, you have some strength because you cannot have both sides of the coin labeled the same, although they don't see each other. But this is the kind of things that I thought June was going to touch later because there are not only two of these sunrise industries that they have. They also have tourism.
Okay. Ito tanong ko sa inyo. In terms of the APEC, ano ba yung dalang bagahe ni Noynoy Aquino, ni President Pinoy, na i-negotiate niya dun sa APEC within these big countries? Ano bang gagawin ni President
Pinoy? Doon nag-announce na may gas tayo sa Spratlys, yung pala sa Palawan. Maliit na kuryente na naman ang impormasyon.
Kasi ang perception usually, the APEC is being conducted only for these big countries to bully the small countries and for their demand to be followed by the small countries. It's about time that our country would present our platforms kung ano yung gusto natin na mangyari sa kanila. Ang tanong ko nga, yung presidente ba may dala ba siyang plataforma o programa para sa APEC na para i-present dito sa mga malalaking bansang ito?
I don't know whether he has, but I think basically, for example, in the Philippines, I think there are lots of things that we need to do. For example, when it comes to implementation of the law, we have the laws. We have all sorts of regulation. But I think when it comes to the implementation, like what you said, the oligarch somehow becomes an exception.
Yeah.
It's only applied to some people that does not belong to the inner circle. So I think that's our basic problem, because I think within our country, if we're able to really encourage transparency, encourage competition, as you're saying, then I think to a certain extent, that's going to really work for us. But it's in the implementation, because even if they say we're opening up the economy, actually they slow down everything so that even if you're coming in, it takes you a year to register.
Nakabuti ba sa atin ng APEC yung unang inintroduce yan ni President Ramos?
Yes.
Since the days of Subic, di ba punta pa rito si Clinton, may malaking bruhaha.
Yes.
Has it helped the local farmer then?
Not immediately, but if they follow the plan, the roadmap that was laid down in
It's called
Subic.
globalization, di ba? Reduced tariffs, free trade.
It's supposed to be by 2015.
Yeah.
There's supposed to be a reduction down below 5%, among the member countries. The 21.
But the problem with that one is, we lowered the tariff, but our production cost is high because we have small lots, let's say 1 hectare per farmer. So how are you going to become productive? How are you going to become, let's say, competitive? Because, for example, in some of the countries where they have farming, industrial farming, it's more...
Pero kung ipasok nila mga produkto nila, we import. For example, in the chicken industry, we're going to kill our own chicken industry. That's not good.
Yeah, that's
we start importing the rice as well, and our farmers cannot compete kasi kalaban natin, it's subsidized by the other countries. Their government subsidized them.
Vietnam and Thailand.
They're going to come in with their produce. Like here, it's happening today. We have the garlic that's coming in from Taiwan, and the better garlic, which is from Ilocos, is being pushed away, di ba?
But not only that, look at smuggling.
Well, that's another problem. We've got a medtech student who's on top of that.
Well, it's the implementation.
Pun intended.
It's the implementation, really. And you go down to corruption. You go down to corruption. You go down to politics. Because whether we like it or not, Philippine politics is both personal and transactional. Meron bang cash sunduan? Kung walang cash sunduan, walang mangyayari dyan. Yun ang ibig sabihin nun. Kaya, kung babaguhin yung tinatawag natin mindset, yung pag-iisip ng tao, kung paano ang bawat Pilipino magkakaisa lamang, dahil merong magpapakita sa kanila, sa 10 taon, ganito tayo. 12 taon, ganito tayo. 20 taon, ganito tayo. Meron kang timeline. Mangyari, maski saan ka magpunta, kapag ka ang trabaho mo ay manager, wala kang dapat gawin talaga, kundi ilagay mo sa tweed yung daan at malalaman ng tao kung saan papunta yung daan na yan.
Pero yung mindset nga natin parang bahala na Kasi our leaders, I think, are smart people, and they have reached that height because they do realize how to manipulate.
But leaders should not be bahala na. They should have a foresight.
I know, and their foresight is the society will not change,
Yeah.
and that's why they're manipulating the situation for their own advantage. Instead of leading our nation to a better situation, they just take advantage of the situation because we're always waiting for a strong man. We're always waiting for someone to take care of us, and so as a result of that, people take advantage of that.
Gentlemen, we're at the bottom of the hour, and we're going to have to take a short break. But stay with us. We've got again, because I'm not sure the card or the letters are under me. I've got John Teope to my right, as you can see him right there. We've got June Salipsip, and we've got Gil Santos with us right here on air. Now, before we end, very quickly, where are we going? How are we going to get there? Do we even know where we are going? And do we want to go where we're supposed to be going? I guess these are the questions we have to answer and address, because change is upon us whether we like it or not, and if the only thing that remains static, it's change.
Yes.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hi, we're back. And we're going to try to answer the questions. What really is APEC doing for the Philippines? And towards the weekend, we're going to have another meeting in Bali. And this time, it's going to be the ASEAN, the 10-nation ASEAN Summit meeting in Bali, where our own president is going to participate as well. Now, the questions are, number one, is the APEC really good for the Philippines? What benefit has it given the Philippines so far, And how is the Bali meeting going to wind up? How are we going to cope with it? The way I see it is, if the Filipinos, if our farmers, if our entrepreneurs, if our elite are not going to change their thinking and adapt, number one, adopt modern technologies. Number two, give access to the entrepreneurs, the small entrepreneurs. Change some of the constitutional restrictions on the economic provisions so that investors can come in. And, on top of it all, have the political will to be able to address all these problems within a time frame per problem, then we won't get anywhere. These are the only management styles that I know, methods that I know, which can keep us in cadence with the rest of the world. What do you think, June?
I think our basic problem is we cannot think about the future. Oftentimes when you talk to people, they're only thinking about the next election. They're only thinking about maybe the next day. So as a result of that, we propagate what we have because we are incapable of really looking forward. For example, if our population doubles in 2050, or even if it just increases by 50%, how are we going to feed our population? What kind of peace and order condition are we going to have? What kind of education should we have? All those kinds of questions. But you see, we will not be able to think about those things if we don't force ourselves to think in terms of those problems. Because even if you ask for politicians today, what are they thinking about? It's the next election. When you ask them to think about 2050, to be able to plan for that eventuality, they have difficulty thinking about that. So, for example, nowadays, we have so much land, and we have so much population. So can with the growing population, the hectares of rice that's going to be planted is going to be smaller. how are we going to survive? What kind of crop should we?
But this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You see, if you have that shrinking natural asset of hectarage, you see, don't forget, we have 30 million hectares in the Philippines, you know, but that has shrunk. We have degraded the forests. The rainforests are less than 2 million hectares now. Now, if we don't adopt modern technologies, how are we going? We cannot survive that. They say, well, no nation is going to sink. No nation is going to go under because people will improvise as they go along. But do we want? I don't want to improvise as we go along. I want to have a plan that is going to push us in cadence with the rest of the world, because otherwise we're going to be simply dead meat.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to point out, because if we don't look at the scenarios that's going to happen given that kind of population, we'll never be able to really think in terms of alternative solution. Like, for example, you're talking about technology. Even if you have a shrinking hectarage of rice, with the kind of technology that we have nowadays, we can have more productive seeds that can really produce the kind of food that we would need.
Or even adopt hydroponics.
Yeah, hydroponics. And even, for example, when it comes to fisheries also, I think we would be able to really think in terms of, we need to feed our people. What kind of technology, what kind of...
sea farming.
Exactly, those kinds of things. But we are unable to think about those things. We are unable to change our mindset because we're not looking too far ahead. We're always looking at the present. That's why I think whenever there are surveys, Filipinos are always the happiest because we don't think about the past, and that's why we don't have guilt. We don't think about the future, that's why we don't have anxiety. So we're very happy. Bahala na. And we need to change that kind of mindset. I think the only way to do that is to show the future. This is the future. We're going to live in that future. So what are the alternatives? And then we can make, I think, an informed choice.
This is where we're saying, in the center, you see, the futuristic center, the process of making that vision, of putting that vision forward and informing the people is an art, and a science as well. Because unless the people themselves go down to the lowest level, the barangays, unless they identify themselves with that concept, with that future, they're not going to support it. Our history in governance has been strewn with so much national plans all on the countryside. Why? Because the people out in the provinces, especially those in local governments, are saying, okay, Malacanang, you gave me this plan. NEDA, put it out. Now, I'm not part of this. All I have to do is implement it. Give me the money, and I'm going to do it. If it fails, it's not my fault.
In terms of the mindsets, that you're now looking at development on the countrysides. But one thing that the people didn't look at in terms of the mindset is the peace and order aspects on the countrysides. Usually, as I mentioned, is that why would investors invest in the countrysides if there is terrorism within the countrysides? Look at Mindanao. Look at Parklang, Bicol area. Even if we open investment for other countries to come in and potential investors, as long as there is terrorism that is happening within the countrysides, that is the problem. So, first things first is that we need to look at an agenda of this government on how to suppress insurgency and terrorism. Because regardless on how we open the economy, as long as there are terroristic acts in this country, we could not sell this country to these investors. Second, the APEC itself, there's only one word that would result to APEC, trade deficit. Why? Because usually in terms of economics, what we will always speak of trade, import, and export. The result of the APEC would be more importation and less exportation for us because we could not compete in the international market because these countries would like to sell their product to the small countries. So what would happen to the Philippines? Still, dollar would be the peso value would be small. And as we look at it in the international market, is that why is the Philippine peso not rising? Simple, ladies and gentlemen, because the demand for the Philippine product is not as high as that in the international market.
Why? Because we don't market it properly, or we don't produce enough?
We don't produce enough, and also we do not have certain technologies that we offer. Because usually, the Bretton Woods industries, or the IMF and the World Bank and this World Trade Organization, they always say that these are the only products that you would invest, and you would be dependent to us.
Yes.
So even a small steel, we could not manufacture small steel. Even the karayom, the needle, we import the karayom. So how could we develop technologies? How could we manufacture computers? So what is the landmark product that we have right now? Agriculture.
So yeah, but for example, even in agriculture, the way we pick our fruits, we don't pick it properly. We don't package it properly. That's why we cannot sell it properly. So I think our marketing needs to be improved. And on the question of terrorism, or on the question of, I think this is a political issue, because you see, some people who'd like to be heard and is not heard, they resort to terrorism. Because I think there are certain things that we need to be able to open up and resolve, because this revolution is not going to stop until we are able to listen to each other. I think.
But this results to the social injustices being experienced by people, and the government should do something about these social injustices. For example, economics. People go to the mountain, they would say we have a starving stomach. We go to the mountains. So what we need right now is opportunity for people.
Right.
For them to be For them to be heard, and for them to have food every day. So that's it. The problem is that these political oligarchs and even the political dynasties are controlling everything. They would like to let the people be poor so long, so that in terms of election they could buy their votes.
But at the same time, I think again, that's the victim mentality that we have as Filipinos, and I think what we need to show our people is that they should get out of this mentality, that there is a way by which they can get out of this hole.
So how? No. Okay, I'll address that how. See, the Filipinos, because of our historical past, have been taught that if you own the land, you are powerful. If you own the land, you're politically embedded also. No, not so. Because even if you are owning the land, and that land does not produce you anything that you can sell, you still have, you're under obligation to pay for the taxes on the land. And therefore, it's not an asset, it's a liability.
It's a liability.
Therefore, he must be changed mentally, that merely owning the property is not the proper way of doing it. You must make it productive. There must be some.
Not only that, we should not live for the present, because if you harvest 100 kabans, you should always take 10%, let's say, for your seeds, 10% for your savings, 10%.
That's right.
And I think we need to do that, because what happens today is we practically borrow money. We spend more than what we earn because of the mentality that we have, and we need to change that kind of mindset, because I think we need to be able to work hard and also save, instead of having fun all the time, because I think Filipinos are very fond of having fun and having fiesta and borrowing money to be able to have that kind of.
Now that kind of change of mentality is going to take a long time. And the only country I know that changed in 25 years was Ireland. They were able to do it. And what did they do? They cut down their taxes by half. They retired incompetent government people, civil service people, and they gave them retirement pay. In the case of Singapore at one time in the past, what did Lee Kuan Yew do? He retired all those incompetents, doubled the salary of those competents who stayed, and made sure that the retirements of these people were invested by the government, guaranteed as an indebtedness of the government itself.
But that's what Harry said. It takes political will. If you don't have political will to make it happen, it will never happen.
Okay, would you agree to me? Because in terms of the national budget, I think about a bigger percentage of the national budget would go to foreign debt. Servicing, we pay. Why not pay the foreign debt? And let this money be used for livelihood of people. Would you agree with that with me?
Well, this is where the negotiating capability of the national leadership falls in. Because look at what Pakistan did when they dealt with the U.S. at one time. $10 billion was written off by the U.S. during the Clinton administration. Why? Because they knew how to make the Americans see their point to the advantage of the Americans. Why can't we make the Philippines be useful to the Americans at the same time be of service to our own national interest? That is the point. But that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of brain work.
So what we're trying to say basically is, like June was saying, the leaders can't be too far away from his people. You were saying that the first part. We have an identity crisis of who the Filipino is today and who he should be. So the people in general have a difficult time to aspire what they need to be because there's a lack of an image of where and how they should be. Parang ganun na nangyayari. So, the problem basically goes back again to our, well...
Education.
Yes, the education system has failed us. Our leaders have failed us in the last 5-6 decades. I wonder how many politicians walk around with their big names and their oligarch ways.
They couldn't care less.
As if they did a good job for the country. It's sad because it is a bit of a mess. Now, we have the current leadership that has been born out of personality, has been born out of monies, oligarchies, and we are seeing, as it unfolds in the Senate, how money has and power manipulated the results of elections. Now, we see this, but you see, we are being ruled by the many, the majority, because of what we call democracy. And the democracy we have is being run by the majority, the masses, who'd rather enjoy themselves.
Yes.
So, we're doomed.
Yes.
Now, going into the APEC and going into the World Economic
And the
ASEAN, what we do have to offer, I admit though, is yes, we do have natural resources. We've got land. I mean, God gave us the Philippines, and I try not to say that too loud, especially in TV, because baka lahat sila pumunta rito. Mga Koreano na, diba? They're all running to our country.
Yes.
This is really God's country, so let's just keep them away. Problem is the Muslims are beginning to come in on the sides. But given the cancers that are metastasizing all over, our leaderships are duty-bound to be competent. What we should do is outsource our judiciary, make everybody accountable, and punish incompetence. Ideally. But you see, we don't have the time any longer. Japan had to close how many years? 40 years to find themselves? China had to do that, close to 50 years.
And don't forget that Japan had to have the samurai.
But just to identify themselves. But in the modern world of 2011, with iPads and phones all over the place, there's no way we're going to be able to isolate ourselves. So what is the solution, gentlemen?
The solution is you start now by taking the first step towards the mind change. And that is consultation.
Okay,
you have to consult our people. Because unless they identify themselves with that future, we're telling them that we're going to take them, they're not going to help at all. And they're not going to support the idea.
But the guy down there in the province, all the way in Bolinao, all the way in Sulu, all the way in Apari, what does he care?
No, he can care.
He can bili ng dyaryo yan. Yung mga shows na ganito, hindi mo papanoorin yan. Pag tayo naka-shorts at sumasayaw tayo, gumigiling tayo, baka pwede pa. Naka-Amerikana tayo, naka-Bibis tayo.
Kaya nga sinasabi ko, Harry, sinasabi ko, Harry, is this takes a minimum of 12 years. A minimum of 12 years. Before,
number 12.
Because it takes 2 presidential terms to be able just to spread the information.
But what we need here is that a leader that would really have the political will.
Yes.
That if you do not like to be changed, I would change you.
Yes.
This is my value. This is all what I would like for this country to happen.
So Marcos was right. He was in the right direction.
In one way, only in one way. But when he tried to legalize everything that he had, including those he wanted his way, that's different. That's a different story altogether.
So going back to all these world meetings that are taking place, and this one coming in this weekend,
ASEAN.
The ASEAN, well, these are our neighbors. We have to trade with them. There's no country that is an island. But there are specific things that we need to import, and we have extras of other things that we should export. And the ideal trade is, especially within the ASEAN, I think will work. But going broad mind in the Asia-Pacific rim is a bit
Now, admittedly, Harry, the ASEAN is a fragmented group of countries. Why? Because it has been subjected to colonialism years and years and years back.
But they're all growing. Tayo lang hindi.
I know. It takes time to be able to integrate. Now, integration requires a minimum ceiling for your budgetary deficits. Otherwise, the cost of your money and the cost of your wealth, national wealth, won't be equal. You see, you have to have equal assets. Let's put it that way. It's like putting up a corporation. Everybody chips in for a $1 million, 1 million peso company. Your paid up is what? 62,500.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all must be on the same level. Now, you cannot be on the same level if you have different degrees of corruption. Number one, different degrees of political will, different degrees of levels of education, awareness of current events, and how these are going to affect you. These are the things that, and let's not forget, the level of peace and security.
Yeah, okay. Now you mentioned the ASEAN. Ang punto rito is that when the president go to the ASEAN and even in APEC, he should be transparent enough to tell the people, ano ba yung aking dadaling agenda sa pakikipag-usap. Sana sa ASEAN ma-discuss ni President Noynoy yung usapin sa Sabah, sa usapin sa Spratly, at ang usapin ng isang ASEAN currency na tinatawag. Kasi within that point is that this is a group of nations that would like to talk in terms of peace and order and in terms of economic development. Na matagal nang pinag-uusapan ng ASEAN currency pero hanggang ngayon the euro.
Mabuti na lang wag na look what's happening to the euro. I think the euro is about to blow up. Yeah. But let's not forget. Let's see, in the last 3 months, we have been voted to have the worst airport in the world.
Yes.
And recently that has been complimented to the worst place to do business in the world because it's difficult here. Diba? Yes. Now, the solution of Mar Rojas was, let's rebuild. Diba? Rebuild the airport. Ako naman sa loob-loob, hindi naman pangit talaga na ang problema, yung mga managers niyan, diba? Nababoy nila. Nawala, ang laki-laki kinikita ng airport na yan, wala naman pumupunta para maayos. So, ano gagawin natin naman pagdating sa bayan? Because we're the worst place to do business. Sara natin, rebuild natin Pilipinas? Maybe, no? Shoot all the incompetents. No, but with regards to the President of the United States gracing the event in the ASEAN, anong pakialam ng Amerika dito sa atin? Isa pa yun, no? Sa ASEAN.
No, merong relevance yun. It's because the ASEAN is now becoming the hub, becoming the centerpiece for the Americans to use vis-a-vis China. Vis-a-vis China. So it's geopolitics all in play again.
Gentlemen, we're at the top of the hour. We're about to close, so let's give each other's message, exit message to our viewers as we've been talking openly. So let's start with you, Gil.
Well,
the message to the viewers.
The message is the Filipino leadership and the Filipino population, by and large, must agree on our national interest and work towards one goal within a specific time frame. Because that way, we can see, hey, this is our future. This is our objective. In short, what you call in scientific management as management by objectives. You have a set goal. And you must now work towards that. Because otherwise, we're going to be the bread basket.
We have June Salipsip. June, your message.
Yeah, my message is that we need to start thinking in terms of our future, because if we don't think about our future, that's the place where we will live anyway. And if we don't plan for that, I think we will just meander around, and as a result of that, we will. I think we will not amount to much to anything, because if you don't have a goal, I think you'll be a failure.
Thank you very much. John Teope, Dr. Teope.
You know, the APEC and the ASEAN is the opportunity for the President to present the Philippines, what are demands in this conference. Sana naman yung Pangulo ay na-present kung ano yung nararapat at makatulong sana yung pagpunta ng Pangulo dito sa APEC at sa ASEAN. Kasi kung hindi, sayang lang ang perang ginastos ng taong bayan sa pagpunta niya dyan. Yung mga junket na sumabay dyan, inubos niyo lang ang pera ng taong bayan. Sana meron pong resulta ang APEC at ang ASEAN. Yun po lamang.
I guess I'm going to have to close this with a message. So my message would be, why don't we send Laila de Lima there so she can sue all the people that are incompetent and making it difficult for the Philippines? Comedy, error, either way, food for thought. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching the show. Stay with us here in GNN. We'll be back again next Monday. There's a replay at 11 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, again in the morning. And soon you'll have it in the tube. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
are what you watch.